December 27, 1941, 0442 a.m. Vågsøy Island, Norway. The North Sea wind cut like razors across the deck of HMS Prince Charles as it approached the Norwegian coast. Staff Sergeant William Bill Harrison, 3 Commando, checked his Bergen pack one final time. Inside, 400 yards of piano wire, 12 detonators, and a roll of surgical tape. The briefing had been clear. Operation Archery. Destroy the fish oil factories. Germans used Norwegian fish oil for explosives, glycerin production. Cut the supply, slow their bomb production. Simple on paper. What Command didn't know, Harrison had spent 3 months developing a technique the demolition manual said was impossible. Wire-cutting charges, precision cuts on steel I-beams using shaped piano wire and minimal explosive. The demolition school at Lochalore had rejected his proposal. Unstable, they said. Unpredictable blast patterns. Harrison had tested it anyway. 47 successful trials in the Scottish Highlands. The wire concentrated blast force like a surgical scalpel. 1/10 the explosive, 10 times the precision. In 4 hours, he would prove every demolition instructor wrong. The fish oil factories at Moløy and South Vågsøy would burn, and the technique would spread through every commando unit from Norway to North Africa. But first, they had to survive the landing. If stories of courage and ingenuity move you, please like and subscribe. Every subscription helps us honor the memories of those who served. William Harrison grew up in Sheffield, in the shadow of the steel mills. Born 1915, the youngest of 4 brothers. His father, Thomas Harrison, worked as a crane operator at Hadfield Steel Foundry, 42 years lifting molten crucibles, never missing a shift. The family lived on Attercliffe Road, where the air tasted of coal smoke and hot metal. Young Bill spent his childhood in the foundry after school, not working, child labor laws prevented that, but watching. He watched his father calculate load weights by eye, watched riggers thread cables through pulleys with mathematical precision, watched welders join steel plates with such accuracy the seams became invisible. By age 12, Harrison could calculate load-bearing capacity faster than the foreman. By 14, he understood metallurgy better than men who'd worked steel for decades. His teachers at Attercliffe Central School noticed. They pushed him toward engineering college. Then 1929 hit. The Depression. The steel mills cut production by 60%. Thomas Harrison's wages dropped from 42 shillings per week to 28. Engineering college became impossible. Harrison left school at 15. He took an apprenticeship as a welder at the foundry. 5 years learning to join steel with such precision that pressure vessels could hold 3,000 pounds per square inch. He developed a reputation. Harrison's welds don't fail. September 1939. Germany invaded Poland. Harrison was 24, still welding at Hadfields. He enlisted immediately. Royal Engineers seemed natural. He expected bridge building, perhaps mine clearance. Instead, they assigned him to No. 3 Commando, formed June 1940 under Lieutenant Colonel John Durnford Slater. The Commandos were Churchill's special operations concept, small units conducting raids on German-occupied Europe. Harrison's welding background made him valuable for demolitions. Training happened at Lochalore, Scotland. 12 weeks of explosives, navigation, close-quarters combat, survival skills. Harrison excelled at demolitions but noticed something. The techniques were crude. Military demolitions use massive amounts of explosive. The sledgehammer approach, instructors called it. Entire buildings collapsed when you only needed to cut specific beams. Harrison started experimenting. At Sheffield, he'd learned precision, surgically removing a single weld without disturbing surrounding structure. Could the same principle apply to demolitions? He began testing in his spare time. Piano wire, high tensile steel, flexible, almost unbreakable. If you wrapped it around an I-beam in specific patterns and attached small-shaped charges, the blast force concentrated along the wire. The wire became a cutting edge. The beam sheared cleanly. Minimal collateral damage. First test: sheep barn in the Highlands. Harrison placed 4 wire-cutting charges on the main support beams. Used 200 grams of explosive total. Standard demolition would use 5 kilograms. The barn collapsed perfectly, straight down, no debris spread. He showed his technique to the demolitions instructors. They rejected it immediately. Unstable, they said. What if the wire shifts? What if blast force travels along the wire into the detonator? You'll blow your own hands off, Harrison argued. They refused to listen. Stick to approved techniques, Sergeant. So Harrison kept testing in secret. 47 successful trials over 3 months. Different wire gauges, different explosive types, different beam materials. Every test worked. The technique wasn't unstable, it was revolutionary. By December 1941, Harrison had refined the method to perfection. 1 kilogram of explosive could accomplish what previously required 10. Precision cuts, controlled collapses, surgical demolitions. Operation Archery would be his first chance to prove it in combat. He packed his Bergen with piano wire and shaped charges. If the demolition school wouldn't approve his technique, he'd demonstrate its effectiveness on German infrastructure instead. November 1941, 1 month before Volkssoy. Number 3 Commando conducted Operation Claymore, raid on Lofoten Islands, Norway. Harrison participated. The mission's demolition phase revealed critical problems. The target: fish oil factories and German fuel depots. Standard demolition procedure: place massive charges on main support structures, blow everything, evacuate before collapse. The demolition manual specified charge weights: 5 kilograms per steel I-beam, 10 kilograms for reinforced concrete pillars. At Lofoten, Harrison watched demolition teams work. They packed 80 kilograms of explosive into a single factory. The blast was enormous. Windows shattered 200 yards away. The factory collapsed. Mission successful, technically. But problems became apparent immediately. The massive explosion created debris fields spreading 150 yards in all directions. Flying steel shrapnel injured 2 commandos. Corporal Davies took a steel fragment through his left thigh. Private Morrison suffered ruptured eardrums from blast overpressure at 40 yards. Worse, the explosion was visible from 12 miles away. German coastal observers reported it within minutes. Luftwaffe fighters arrived 18 minutes after detonation. The commandos barely escaped. HMS Queen Emma took machine gun fire during withdrawal. 3 dead, 7 wounded. The demolition teams had used so much explosive that they'd essentially announced their presence to every German unit within 20 miles. After Lofoten, Harrison filed a report. He proposed his wire-cutting technique as an alternative. Benefits: reduced explosive weight, easier to carry, controlled collapse, reduced danger to troops, smaller blast signature, less visible to enemy. The report went to Major Jeffrey Appleyard, 3rd Commando's second-in-command. Appleyard was interested but skeptical. "Show me results, Sergeant. Theoretical demolitions don't win wars." Harrison requested permission to demonstrate. Appleyard agreed. 1 test, supervised, using a condemned building at the training facility. December 3, 1941. Harrison rigged a 2-story stone building scheduled for demolition. Target: collapse the building using minimal explosive. Standard technique would require 40 kilograms of explosive, enough to demolish the building and damage everything within 80 yards. Harrison used his wire-cutting method instead. He placed piano wire around the four main corner support beams. Attached shaped charges, 150 grams each, 600 grams total. The wire created cutting edges. The charges would shear the beams cleanly. 30 spectators gathered, demolition instructors, commando officers, Royal Engineers advisors. Most expected failure. Corporal Jenkins, a demolitions instructor from Loch-Elor, openly mocked it. Piano wire and firecrackers. This is warfare, not a music recital. Harrison set the timer, 30 seconds. Everyone withdrew to 100 yards, standard safety distance for 600 grams of explosive. The blast was barely audible, a sharp crack, like a rifle shot. The building shuddered, then collapsed, straight down, perfectly controlled. The main beams sheared exactly where Harrison placed the wire. The structure folded inward. Total debris spread, 20 yards. The spectators stood silent. No one expected it to work so precisely. Then Major Appleyard said, "How much explosive?" 600 grams, sir. Standard demolition? 40 kilograms for comparable results, sir. Appleyard did the math. 67 times more efficient. Harrison's technique used 1.5% of the standard explosive load to achieve the same result. The demolitions instructors examined the debris. The I-beams showed clean shears, not jagged breaks from massive overpressure, but surgical cuts along the wire lines. The explosive force had been concentrated precisely where Harrison intended. Corporal Jenkins, who'd mocked the technique, now stared at the results. "How did you calculate the charge placement?" Harrison explained, "Sheffield steel mills, sir. We cut beams with torches daily. Same principle. Concentrate heat along a narrow line. The steel fails cleanly. Replace heat with explosive force. Add tensile wire to direct the blast. Same result." Major Appleyard made a decision. "Harrison, your primary demolitions for Operation Archery. Bring your piano wire. Let's see if this works on German infrastructure." 2 weeks later, Harrison boarded HMS Prince Charles headed for Volgsoy. His Bergen contained 400 yards of piano wire and 8 kilograms of explosive. Standard demolition load would be 120 kilograms. He'd accomplished the same mission carrying 93% less weight. But theory and controlled tests were different from combat. Norwegian fish oil factories, defended by German troops, under fire, that would be the real test. December 15th to 26th, 1941. HMS Prince Charles, Norwegian Sea, approaching Volgsoy Island. Harrison spent the voyage preparing his equipment and training other commandos on wire-cutting techniques. The mission briefing was detailed. Operation Archery would strike simultaneously at Molloy, main target, fish oil factory, and South Volgsoy, secondary target, herring oil plant. Intelligence reported 150 German troops garrisoning the islands, plus coastal artillery. The plan, naval bombardment from HMS Kenya and 4 destroyers, would soften defenses at 8:48 a.m. Commandos would land immediately after, 3 groups. Group 1, Major Jack Churchill's force, would assault Molloy town and the fish oil factory. Group 2, Captain Peter Young's force, would secure South Volgsoy. Group 3, Captain Ronald Swain's force, would provide covering fire and engage German reinforcements. Harrison's role, demolish both fish oil facilities. Primary target structures, the processing buildings containing the glycerin extraction equipment. Secondary targets, fuel storage tanks and German ammunition depots. Major Appleyard assigned Harrison 2 assistants, Lance Corporal Thomas Webb, former coal miner from Wales, explosives experience, and Private Richard "Ricky" Holland, former shipyard worker from Glasgow, mechanical aptitude. Harrison briefed them. We're using wire cutting charges. Forget everything demolition school taught you. We're not demolishing these factories. We're surgically dismantling them. Webb was skeptical. Surge, we've got maybe 30 minutes on the ground before German reinforcements arrive from Floro. Can wire cutting work that fast? Harrison spread out blueprints, Norwegian architectural plans obtained by SOE Intelligence. The Molloy fish oil factory had 8 main buildings. Standard demolition would require planting charges in all 8, using approximately 240 kilograms of explosive, requiring 90 minutes minimum. Look at the structures, Harrison said, pointing. The processing equipment, the glycerin extractors, are housed in buildings 3 and 5. Everything else is storage, offices, worker housing. Destroy buildings 3 and 5. You destroy the facility's productive capacity. Germans can rebuild walls and roofs, but the extraction equipment, that's imported from Germany, takes months to replace. He traced his finger across the blueprints. Building 3, 4 corner support beams, 12-inch steel I-beams. Building 5, 6 support beams, 16-inch I-beams. 10 beams total. Wire cutting charges on each beam. Controlled collapse. Both buildings down in 10 minutes. Holland studied the plans. What about the fuel storage? Secondary priority, Harrison said. If time permits, we'll puncture the tanks with rifle fire, then ignite with phosphorus grenades. Simple. But the processing buildings are critical. Those go down first. Harrison spent the next 3 days training Webb and Holland. They practiced rigging wire-cutting charges on the ship's steel support beams, not detonating them, obviously, just practicing the technique. Wrap the wire in Z patterns around the beam. Attach the shaped charge to the wire with surgical tape. Set the detonator. Clear the area. By December 26th, both men could rig a beam in 90 seconds. Harrison also prepared something the demolition manual specifically forbade: sequential charges with split-second timing. Standard doctrine said, detonate all charges simultaneously. Safer, simpler. But Harrison wanted controlled collapse. Building 3 would fall southward, away from Building 4, which contained civilian workers. Building 5 would fall westward, into open ground. This required precise timing. South beams detonate first, creating directional collapse. He rigged special delay detonators, tiny magnesium filaments that burned at measured rates: 5-second delay, 10-second delay, 15-second delay. Not standard issue. Harrison made them himself using watch components and magnesium ribbon. The night before the raid, Major Appleyard visited Harrison's quarters. Last chance to switch to standard demolition, Sergeant. No shame in it. Wire cutting is unproven under combat conditions. Harrison understood Appleyard's concern. If the technique failed, the mission failed. If Harrison got killed before completing demolitions, his assistants couldn't replicate the work. The technique was too specialized. Sir, I've run 47 tests. Wire cutting works. But I'll bring standard charges as backup. If something goes wrong, we'll sledgehammer the buildings. Appleyard nodded. Fair enough. One question. Why does this matter so much to you? Harrison thought about Sheffield, about his father calculating crane loads by eye, about precision welding, about doing things right, not just doing things big. Sir, at Sheffield, we had a saying: proper job or no job. A weld either holds pressure or it fails. No middle ground. Demolitions should be the same. Don't just blow things up, dismantle them properly. Use the minimum force necessary to achieve maximum effect. That's proper soldiering. Appleyard smiled. Very well, Sergeant. Show the Germans what a Sheffield proper job looks like. December 27th, 04:30 a.m. Final equipment check. Harrison's Bergen, 400 yards of piano wire, weight 8 kilograms, 20 shaped charges, 8 kilograms explosive total, delay detonators, surgical tape, wire cutters, rope, pitons. Total demolitions weight, 18 kilograms. Standard demolition load for the same mission, 240 kilograms. Harrison had reduced the load by 92.5%. Lance Corporal Webb asked, "What if Germans are using the buildings as defensive positions? We can't rig charges while taking fire." "Then we clear them first," Harrison said. "Grenades, small arms. Once the building's clear, I need 3 minutes per beam. We've got 10 beams total, 30 minutes work time. Add 10 minutes for unexpected problems. 40 minutes from landing to detonation," Holland pointed out. "Intelligence says German reinforcements from Floro arrive within 60 minutes of first contact." "Then we have 20 minutes margin," Harrison said. "Plenty of time." That was optimistic. Harrison knew it. Combat never went according to plan. But his technique would work. He'd proven it 47 times. The question wasn't whether the charges would cut the beams. The question was whether they'd survive long enough to plant them. At 4:42 a.m., HMS Prince Charles reached the landing point. The loading ramps dropped. Commandos filed into the assault boats. Harrison checked his Bergen one last time. Piano wire, shaped charges, detonators. A Sheffield proper job, about to begin. December 27, 1941, 8:48 a.m. The naval bombardment began exactly on schedule. HMS Kenya's 6-inch guns opened fire on Molloy. The shells screamed overhead, deep thunder rolling across the Norwegian fjord. German coastal batteries returned fire immediately. Harrison crouched in Landing Craft Assault 12 with Webb and Holland. 43 other commandos packed the boat, Major Jack Churchill's assault group. Churchill stood at the bow, his trademark broadsword strapped to his back. He actually carried a broadsword into combat. Most men thought he was mad. Harrison thought he understood. Psychological warfare. A man charging with a medieval sword created fear more potent than bullets. The bombardment lasted 4 minutes, then silence. Major Churchill raised his arm. "For England and for hell." The landing craft surged forward. 800 yards to shore. Naval gunfire had created smoke. Thick black clouds from burning buildings, white smoke from phosphorus shells. Perfect concealment. At 200 yards, German machine guns opened fire. MG-34s from the waterfront buildings. Tracers cut across the water. The landing craft's forward armor deflected most rounds, but 2 commandos at the rear took hits. Private Matthews through the shoulder, Corporal Davies through the neck. The craft hit the beach at 8:54. The ramp dropped. Churchill charged forward, sword raised. The commandos followed. Harrison went left, toward the fish oil factory complex. Webb and Holland stayed close. The factory was 300 yards inland. 8 buildings clustered around a central processing yard. German resistance was heavier than intelligence predicted. At least 40 troops defending the factory perimeter. They'd fortified the administration building with sandbags and positioned 2 MG-34 machine guns covering the approaches. Major Churchill's group engaged them immediately. Tommy guns and rifle fire, grenades. The distinctive crack-crack-crack of British No. 36 Mills bombs. The Germans returned fire, Mauser rifles and MP-40 submachine guns. Harrison, Webb, and Holland used the chaos. They circled right, using the smoke as cover, approaching the factory from the east side, away from the main fighting. At 9:02, they reached Building 3, the primary target. The glycerin extraction facility, a 2-story stone structure with steel I-beam roof supports. Through the windows, Harrison saw the extraction equipment, massive copper tanks with pipes running between them. This was the critical infrastructure. Destroy this, the factory became useless. They entered through a side door. The ground floor was empty. Workers had evacuated when the bombardment started. But upstairs, Harrison heard footsteps, German voices shouting. Webb pointed upward. Surge! They're using second floor as a fighting position. Harrison signaled, "We clear it first." He pulled a number 36 grenade, pulled the pin, tossed it up the stairwell. Crack. The explosion shook the building. Then silence. They climbed the stairs, weapons ready. 3 German soldiers dead from the grenade. 2 wounded, moaning. Harrison and Webb tied the wounded Germans' hands, dragged them downstairs, left them outside where medics could find them later. 9:07 a.m., Building 3 secured. Harrison examined the support beams. Perfect. 4 corner beams, exactly as the blueprints showed. 12-inch steel I-beams supporting the roof structure. He pulled piano wire from his Bergen. Webb, southeast corner. Holland, southwest. I'll take the north beams. 3 minutes per beam, rig them fast. The technique was simple but required precision. Harrison wrapped piano wire around the northeast corner beam in a Z pattern, 3 loops, each positioned exactly where stress calculations indicated maximum structural weakness. He secured the wire with surgical tape, then attached the shaped charge, 150 grams of explosive, positioned so blast force would direct along the wire. Finally, the detonator, the 15-second delay type. This beam would detonate last, creating directional collapse toward the south. 2 minutes, 40 seconds. Faster than practice, he moved to the northwest beam. Same procedure, Z-pattern wire, shaped charge, detonator, 10-second delay. 2 minutes, 30 seconds. Outside, the battle intensified. Rifle fire, machine guns. The whump of a German stick grenade. A commando yelling, "Grenade! Down!" Harrison ignored it. Focus on the work. Sheffield precision. A proper job. Webb finished the southeast beam. "Southeast rigged, Surge!" Holland struggled with the southwest beam. The wire kept slipping. His hands shook. Combat stress. Harrison moved to help. "Steady hands, Ricky. Pretend you're back at the Glasgow shipyard. This is just another weld." Holland took a breath, steadied, wrapped the wire properly. Attach the charge. 9:14 a.m. All 4 beams rigged. Building 3 ready to collapse. "Building 5, Harrison said. "Move." They exited Building 3. The central yard was chaos. Commandos advancing through smoke. Germans retreating toward the town. Someone had set fire to a fuel storage tank. Black smoke billowed 200 feet high. Building 5 was 80 yards away. Larger than Building 3. 6 support beams instead of 4. This would take longer. They sprinted across the yard. Bullets kicked up gravel around them. A German soldier appeared from behind a stack of oil barrels, 30 yards away, raising his rifle. Webb shot him. 3-round burst from his Tommy gun. The German dropped. They reached Building 5. The door was locked. Holland kicked it, didn't budge. Harrison shot the lock with his Webley pistol. The door flew open. Inside, massive glycerin extraction equipment, pipes, valves, tanks. This was the secondary extraction facility, newer, larger than Building 3. But Germans were inside. 4 soldiers using the equipment as cover, firing out the windows at approaching commandos. Harrison threw a grenade. The Germans scattered. The grenade exploded near the extraction tanks. Copper pipes ruptured. Glycerin spilled across the floor. One German soldier didn't move fast enough. Shrapnel caught him across the chest. The remaining 3 Germans retreated upstairs. Harrison let them go. No time for a prolonged firefight. The demolitions mattered more. 9:19 a.m. 6 beams to rig. 4 corner beams plus 2 central support beams. Harrison took the north beams. Webb took the south beams. Holland took the central beams. The work was mechanical now. Muscle memory. Wrap the wire. Z pattern. 3 loops. Secure with tape. Attach the shaped charge. Set the detonator. But the central beams were problematic. 16-inch I-beams, much larger than Building 3's beams. Harrison had calculated 150 grams per beam for 12-inch beams. For 16-inch beams, 225 grams minimum. Holland attached the charges. "Surge, we're running low on explosive. I've only got 180 grams for the last beam." Harrison did quick math. 180 grams might be insufficient to shear a 16-inch beam cleanly. But they didn't have time to retrieve more explosive from his Bergen. "Use what you have," Harrison said. "We'll compensate with wire placement." Holland adjusted the wire pattern, tighter loops, concentrating force on fewer points. It would work, probably. 9:27 a.m. All 6 beams rigged, Building 5 ready. Outside, the battle was turning. German resistance collapsing. Major Churchill's voice echoing across the factory yard. "Advance! Press forward!" Harrison, Webb, and Holland exited Building 5. They ran 150 yards away from both buildings, minimum safe distance for 3 kilograms of explosive distributed across 10 charges. Harrison checked his watch. 9:28 a.m. The shortest delay detonator was set for 5 seconds, the longest for 15 seconds. Detonation sequence would begin in approximately 12 minutes, allowing time for commandos to clear the area. But then Harrison saw something that made his blood freeze. Building 5's second-floor window. A German soldier appeared. He was dragging something. A wounded comrade. The German was trying to evacuate his injured fellow soldier. The building was rigged to collapse in 11 minutes, 30 seconds. If Harrison didn't act, that German and his wounded comrade would die in the collapse. They were enemies, yes. But Harrison wasn't a murderer. Killing armed soldiers in combat was war. Letting men die in a building collapse when you could prevent it, that was something else. He turned to Webb. "Cover me." "Surge, what are you doing?" Harrison sprinted back toward Building 5, 150 yards, his Bergen bouncing on his back, his Webley pistol in his hand. He reached the building, kicked open the door, yelled in broken German, "Raus! Raus! Building explode! Schnell!" The German soldier upstairs didn't understand at first. Then he saw Harrison pointing frantically at the ceiling, at the rigged beams, making explosion gestures with his hands. The German's eyes widened. He shouted to someone else upstairs. 2 more Germans appeared, helping carry wounded comrades. Harrison gestured, "Out! Now!" He pointed toward the door, toward safety. The Germans stumbled downstairs carrying their wounded. 4 men total. They stared at Harrison, a British commando who'd just warned them about demolition charges instead of shooting them. Harrison waved them toward the German defensive lines. "Go! Schnell!" They went, running, limping, dragging their wounded comrades across the factory yard toward the town. Harrison sprinted back to Webb and Holland. His watch showed 9:31 a.m., 8 minutes until detonation. Webb stared at him. "Surge, did you just save Germans?" "They were wounded and trapped," Harrison said. "This is demolition, not murder." Holland asked, "What if they warn other Germans about the rigged buildings?" "They're welcome to try defusing the charges," Harrison said. "But they've got 7 minutes, the detonators are sealed, and they'd need to cut through 400 yards of piano wire to stop the sequence. It won't happen." They withdrew to 200 yards, safe distance from the blast. Other commandos joined them, forming a perimeter. At 9:39 a.m., the first charge detonated. The demolitions weren't a battle in the traditional sense. No firefight, no prolonged engagement. The battle was the demolitions themselves. 10 precision charges detonating in sequence, collapsing two industrial buildings with surgical accuracy while German and British forces fought 300 yards away. But the sequence was complex. Harrison had engineered it carefully. Building 3 would collapse first, 4 charges with 5, 10, and 15-second delays. Building 5 would collapse second, 6 charges with 10, 15, and 20-second delays. The goal: controlled, directional collapse. Buildings falling away from occupied structures, minimizing civilian casualties, and avoiding damage to salvageable equipment. At 9:39:05, the southeast corner beam of Building 3 detonated. The sound was distinctive, not the deep boom of conventional explosives, but a sharp, metallic crack like a steel cable snapping under tension. The piano wire had concentrated blast force into a cutting edge. The 12-inch I-beam sheared cleanly. The southeast corner of the building dropped 3 inches. Harrison watched through binoculars. Perfect. The beam had failed exactly where the wire indicated maximum stress concentration. The building remained standing, one corner compromised, 3 corners still supporting the structure. 5 seconds later, at 9:39:10, the southwest corner beam detonated. Another sharp crack. Another clean shear. The entire south side of Building 3 dropped 6 inches. The roof structure tilted southward. Inside the building, the glycerin extraction equipment began sliding. Copper tanks weighing 800 pounds each shifted toward the compromised south wall. Pipes bent. Valves ruptured. Glycerin spilled across the tilting floor. The building groaned, steel under stress, stone walls shifting. But it still stood. 2 corners compromised, 2 remaining. At 9:39:15, the northwest corner beam detonated. Crack, clean shear. The west side collapsed entirely now. The building tilted dramatically southward, 45-degree angle. The roof structure began folding. The stone walls on the south side buckled. The second floor collapsed onto the first floor. Extraction equipment crashed through floorboards. The distinctive sound of shattering copper, crang, 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 as 2,000 pounds of processing tanks and pipes destroyed themselves. One more charge remaining. The northeast corner beam. The 15-second delay. This final charge would complete the directional collapse. The building would fall entirely southward, into open ground, away from adjacent structures. At 9:39:20, the charge detonated. The northeast beam sheared. The building had no remaining support. Gravity took over. Building 3 collapsed in 3.4 seconds. The roof fell inward. The walls buckled outward, then inward. The structure folded like a house of cards, straight down, minimal lateral spread. Dust exploded upward in a brown cloud. Stone fragments scattered 40 yards. Steel beams crashed and twisted. When the dust cleared, Building 3 was rubble. A pile of stone, steel, and shattered copper equipment. Total debris spread 35 yards from the original building footprint. For comparison, standard demolition technique would have spread debris 150 yards and damaged adjacent buildings. Harrison's wire-cutting method had confined the collapse to a precise footprint. Major Appleyard, watching from 200 yards, turned to Harrison. "Jesus Christ, Sergeant, that was surgical." But there was no time for celebration. Building 5 remained standing, 6 charges, larger beams, questionable explosive load on the final central beam. At 9:39:25, 5 seconds after Building 3's collapse, the first Building 5 charge detonated. Building 5 southeast corner beam. Crack. Clean shear. The building dropped 3 inches. But this building was larger, heavier. The glycerin extraction equipment inside weighed approximately 6,000 pounds, 3 times heavier than Building 3's equipment. The compromised corner struggled to bear the shifted load. At 9:30, the southwest corner detonated. Crack. The south side dropped. The building tilted. But the tilt wasn't as pronounced as Building 3's. The 16-inch beams were thicker, stronger. Even with corners compromised, they resisted catastrophic failure longer. At 9:35, the first central support beam detonated. This charge was critical. The central beams carried most of the roof's weight. If the central beams failed, the building would collapse inward rather than tilting directionally. Crack. The beam sheared. The roof sagged in the middle, but the building remained standing. Now came the problematic charge. The second central beam. Holland had rigged it with only 180 grams of explosive, potentially insufficient for a 16-inch beam. At 9:39:40, the charge detonated. The blast was weaker than the others. Harrison could hear the difference. Less sharp, more muffled. The beam partially sheared, not a clean cut, but a jagged fracture. The beam bent but didn't fully separate. The building groaned but didn't collapse. The partial shear wasn't enough. The remaining beam integrity supported the structure. Harrison's stomach sank. The collapse sequence was failing. Building 5 would remain partially standing, damaged but not destroyed. German engineers could potentially salvage the extraction equipment. He turned to Webb. Backup plan, standard charges. Webb pulled 2 No. 75 Hawkins grenades from his Webb pack, anti-tank grenades, 1.5 pounds of explosive each. Crude but effective. But before Webb could move, the final 2 charges detonated. At 9:39:45, the northwest corner beam. Crack. Clean shear. At 9:39:50, the northeast corner beam. Crack. Clean shear. All corner supports were now compromised. But the partially sheared central beam still held. The building stood at a 30-degree angle, groaning, swaying, but intact. For 5 seconds, nothing happened. The building balanced on the compromised central beam, thousands of pounds of stone, steel, and equipment supported by a single fractured I-beam. Then physics took over. The fractured central beam failed progressively. The fracture propagated along the steel. First 10% of the beam's cross-section separated, then 20%, then 40%. The beam couldn't support the load. At 9:39:58, the beam failed completely. Building 5 collapsed, but not cleanly. The partial beam failure caused asymmetric collapse. Instead of falling straight down, the building twisted as it fell, rotating 15 degrees clockwise. The west wall fell outward instead of inward. Stone blocks scattered 80 yards instead of 40 yards. The roof crashed down. The extraction equipment, 6,000 pounds of copper tanks and pipes, smashed through 2 floors and buried itself in the rubble. Secondary explosions followed as glycerin residue ignited. Small pop-pop-pop sounds as pockets of vapor detonated. The building became rubble in 4.1 seconds. Harrison watched through binoculars, his jaw clenched. The collapse had worked, but it wasn't perfect. The asymmetric fall spread debris further than intended. A large stone block had crashed through the roof of Building 6, a storage building 60 yards away. Not catastrophic, but not surgical. Webb asked, "Did it work, Serge?" "The extraction equipment is destroyed," Harrison said. "Building is rubble. Germans can't salvage it. Mission accomplished." "But—" Webb heard the hesitation in Harrison's voice. "The collapse wasn't clean," Harrison admitted. "The second central beam's charge was too weak." The partial shear caused asymmetric failure. I should have calculated 225 grams minimum, forced Holland to use full load. Surge. The building is destroyed. That's what matters. Harrison shook his head. A proper job means controlled collapse. That wasn't controlled. It was barely contained. If this were Sheffield, the foreman would reject the work. Major Appleyard approached. Sergeant Harrison, both buildings are destroyed. Extraction equipment is unsalvageable. Fuel storage is burning. The fish oil factory is permanently out of commission. Outstanding work. Thank you, sir, but no buts, Sergeant. I watched standard demolition teams at Lofoten use 240 kilograms of explosive to destroy buildings half this size, and they injured our own men with debris. You used 3 kilograms and collapsed 2 buildings with minimal collateral damage. This is exactly the precision we need. Harrison wanted to argue, to explain that the second building's collapse wasn't surgical enough, that Sheffield standards demanded better. But Appleyard was right from a military perspective. Both targets destroyed, minimal friendly casualties, minimal debris spread compared to standard techniques. The explosions had attracted German attention. At 9:42, German reinforcements from Molloy town launched a counterattack, approximately 30 soldiers advancing toward the factory compound. Major Churchill's commandos engaged them immediately. Tommy gunfire, grenades. The Germans took cover behind a low stone wall 150 yards from the factory. The firefight was brief but intense. German MG-34 machine gun fire swept the factory yard. Bullets sparked off steel debris from the collapsed buildings. A commando next to Harrison, Private Wilson, took a round through the shoulder. He dropped, clutching his arm. Webb dragged Wilson to cover behind rubble from Building 3. Harrison provided covering fire with his Webley pistol, 6 shots at the German positions. Mostly ineffective at 150 yards, but enough to make them keep their heads down. The Germans attempted to advance. Major Churchill threw a grenade, a perfect arc, 50 yards, landing directly behind the stone wall. Crack. The explosion killed 2 Germans and wounded 3 more. The German advance faltered. They retreated toward the town. At 9:48, Captain Peter Young's force arrived from South Vogsoy. They'd completed their objectives, destroyed the herring oil plant, engaged German positions there. Now they reinforced Churchill's force at Molloy. With 100-plus commandos now controlling the factory complex, German resistance collapsed. The remaining German soldiers withdrew toward Floro, calling for reinforcements. Major Appleyard ordered, "Consolidate positions, secure the perimeter." German reinforcements will arrive within 15 minutes. But the demolitions were complete. Both primary targets destroyed. The fish oil factories would not produce glycerin for German explosives. Mission accomplished. Harrison surveyed the results. 2 collapsed buildings, rubble piles, twisted steel beams, shattered copper equipment, black smoke from burning fuel storage tanks. Total explosive used, 3 kilograms. Total time from landing to completed demolitions, 54 minutes. Total British casualties from demolitions, 0. Total collateral damage, 1 damaged roof on Building 6. Webb approached, grinning. "Surge, I've never seen demolitions that precise. You cut those buildings like a surgeon." Holland added, "The second building, yeah, it twisted when it fell. But the equipment is destroyed. Germans would need 6 months to rebuild." Harrison nodded slowly. From a military perspective, the mission was successful. But the perfectionist in him, the Sheffield steelworker who'd learned that a proper job meant exact specifications, couldn't fully celebrate. The second central beam should have had 225 grams, not 180 grams. The collapse should have been perfectly vertical, not asymmetric. But war wasn't a controlled test. War was chaos. And in chaos, you adapted. Major Churchill appeared, his broadsword still strapped to his back. "Harrison, brilliant work. I watched those buildings fall. Bloody marvelous. How did you achieve such precision?" Harrison explained the wire-cutting technique. Piano wire concentrating blast force, shaped charges creating directed energy, calculated beam stress points. Churchill listened, fascinated. "Could this work on bridges? Fortifications?" "Yes, sir. Any steel structure. The principle is universal. Find the maximum stress point, concentrate force there, achieve failure with minimal explosive." "I want this technique taught to every commando unit," Churchill said. "After we return to England, you'll demonstrate it at Achnacarry. Make it standard doctrine." Harrison hesitated. "Sir, the demolition school rejected this method. They said it was unstable." "Then the demolition school is run by fools," Churchill said flatly. "I just watched you destroy 2 industrial buildings with 3 kilograms of explosive. Standard demolition would require 100 kilograms and cause chaos. This is the future of military demolitions. You'll teach it, and that's an order." At 10:15, German reinforcements arrived from Floro, 2 companies, approximately 250 troops with armored cars. But the commandos had already re-embarked onto landing craft. The last boats pushed off at 10:22. German artillery fired at the retreating boats. Shells splashed into the fjord, sending up geysers of water. None hit. The commandos escaped. Harrison sat in Landing Craft Assault 12, watching Molloy recede into the distance. Black smoke rose from the burning factory. The 2 collapsed buildings were visible even from 800 yards away, piles of rubble where functional structures had stood 90 minutes earlier. Webb sat beside him. "You did it, Serge. You proved the technique works under fire." Harrison pulled out his notebook, a small leather journal where he recorded demolition test results. He wrote, "Operation Archery, 27th of December, 1941. Molloy Fish Oil Factory. 2 buildings collapsed using wire-cutting charges. Total explosive, 3 kilograms. Time, 54 minutes. Result, successful demolition, targets destroyed." Notes: Second central beam insufficient charge, 180 grams versus required 225 grams. Caused partial shear, asymmetric collapse. Future operations: verify charge weights before rigging, maintain 25% safety margin on calculations. Wire cutting technique validated under combat conditions. Recommend adoption as standard doctrine for precision demolitions. Holland read over his shoulder. "Serge, you're writing a demolitions manual in the middle of a combat extraction?" Harrison smiled. "If we don't document it, we can't replicate it. Sheffield rule, record the proper job, so the next man knows how it's done." The landing craft reached HMS Prince Charles at 10:45. The commandos climbed aboard. Casualty count: 17 British killed, 53 wounded. German casualties: estimated 120 killed, 98 captured. Mission assessment: complete success. The fish oil factories at Molloy and South Vågsøy destroyed. German glycerin production disrupted. Norwegian resistance morale boosted. British commando capability demonstrated. And in Harrison's Bergen, 350 yards of unused piano wire remained. The technique had worked. The demolition school's objections had been proven wrong. Wire-cutting charges were not unstable. They were revolutionary. As HMS Prince Charles sailed away from Norway, Harrison stood at the rail, watching the smoke rise from Molloy. The buildings he'd collapsed. The precision demolitions, the surgical destruction, a Sheffield proper job completed under fire. December 27, 1941, 1430 hours. HMS Prince Charles, Norwegian Sea, returning to Scapa Flow. The commandos gathered on deck for debriefing. Major Appleyard conducted individual interviews, recording each man's account of the operation. When Harrison's turn came, Appleyard asked, "Sergeant, walk me through the demolitions, minute by minute." Harrison provided technical details, buildings rigged in 27 minutes total, detonation sequence lasting 55 seconds, both structures collapsed as intended, extraction equipment destroyed beyond salvage. Appleyard took notes. "You use 3 kilograms of explosive?" 3.2 kilograms, sir. 10 shaped charges at 150 to 225 grams each, plus 400 grams reserve. And standard demolition doctrine would require? Minimum 240 kilograms for comparable results, sir. Possibly 300 kilograms if demolition teams chose to be thorough and destroy surrounding structures. Appleyard did the math. 94% reduction in explosive weight. How did you achieve that efficiency? Harrison explained wire cutting theory again. Concentrate blast force along tensile lines, exploit structural stress points, achieve beam shear with minimal energy input. Could anyone replicate this? With training, yes, sir. The technique requires understanding structural engineering, where beams concentrate load, where stress accumulates. But it's teachable. I trained Webb and Holland in 3 days. They could rig charges competently. Appleyard leaned forward. "Sergeant, here's the reality. Combined Operations is planning dozens of raids across occupied Europe, France, Norway, North Africa. Every raid requires demolitions, bridges, factories, railways, communications. If we use standard techniques, we're carrying hundreds of pounds of explosive per mission. That weight limits what else we can carry. Ammunition, medical supplies, rations." He paused. "But if your technique reduces demolition weight by 90%, we can carry more of everything else, or conduct longer operations, or raid deeper into occupied territory because resupply needs drop dramatically." Harrison understood. This wasn't just about better demolitions, it was about operational flexibility. "Sir, I'm willing to teach the technique to anyone who will learn it." "Good, because when we return to Scotland, you're going to Achnacarry, the Commando training depot. You'll develop a curriculum. Wire cutting charges will become standard demolition doctrine." December 30th, 1941. HMS Prince Charles arrived at Scapa Flow, Orkney Islands. The commandos disembarked. Casualties were evacuated to hospital. Equipment was cleaned and catalogued. After-action reports were compiled. The official assessment, signed by Vice Admiral Louis Mountbatten, Chief of Combined Operations. Operation Archery achieved all primary objectives. Enemy installations destroyed. Norwegian morale boosted. British casualties acceptably low. Demolition operations noteworthy for precision and efficiency. Recommend Sergeant Harrison's techniques be evaluated for wider adoption. 3 days later, Harrison received orders. Report to Special Training Center Achnacarry, Fort William, Scotland. Duration: indefinite. Mission: develop curriculum for precision demolitions training. January 6, 1942. Harrison arrived at Achnacarry, a castle in the Scottish Highlands converted into the Commando training depot. Brutal place. The instructors deliberately made training harder than combat. The theory: if you survived Achnacarry, you'd survive anything. The commandos in training called it Commando Castle, or sometimes Castle Death. The training was designed to weed out weakness. 10-mile speed marches carrying 60-pound Bergens, live fire exercises with real bullets, cliff climbing without safety equipment, unarmed combat where broken bones were common. Harrison was assigned to the demolitions wing, led by Captain Bill Sterling, no relation to David Sterling of SAS fame, though equally competent. Sterling was skeptical about wire-cutting techniques. "I read your report from Volgsoy," Sterling said. "Impressive results. But can it scale? You demolished 2 buildings. What about larger targets? Bridges? Railway viaducts?" "Same principles apply, sir. Find the structural stress points. Concentrate force there. A bridge is just beams and supports. Wire cutting works on any steel structure." "Show me." January 10, 1942. Demonstration Day. Harrison rigged a railway bridge near Fort William, scheduled for demolition anyway, so the Army gave permission. The bridge spanned a 60-foot gorge. Standard demolition would require 200 kilograms of explosive placed at multiple points along the span. Harrison used wire-cutting charges instead. He identified 6 critical points: 3 main support girders and 3 cross braces. Total explosive, 8 kilograms. 50 spectators attended: Commando instructors, Royal Engineers observers, several officers from Combined Operations Headquarters in London. Harrison set the detonators. Everyone withdrew to 200 yards. The charges detonated in sequence over 30 seconds. Crack, 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 crack. Each blast precise, controlled. The bridge collapsed in 12 seconds. The span fell straight down into the gorge. The support girders sheared cleanly at the wire-cutting points. The bridge structure folded inward, minimizing debris spread. Total collapse time, 12 seconds. Total explosive used, 8 kilograms, 96% less than standard techniques. The spectators stood silent. Then Captain Sterling said, "Harrison, you just revolutionized military demolitions." The Royal Engineers observers swarmed Harrison with questions. "How do you calculate charge placement? What wire gauge works best? Can this technique adapt to reinforced concrete? What about underwater demolitions?" Harrison answered each question methodically. The technique was adaptable. Different structures required different calculations, but the principle remained constant. Find maximum stress, concentrate force, achieve failure with minimal input. January 15, 1942. Harrison began teaching formal classes at Achnacary. The curriculum covered: Week 1. Structural engineering basics, load-bearing analysis, stress concentration points, material failure modes, steel versus concrete versus wood, blueprint reading for demolitions planning. Week 2. Wire cutting theory, piano wire specifications and properties, Z-pattern wrapping technique, charge placement calculations, detonator timing for sequential collapses. Week 3. Practical application rigging practice on test structures, charge weight calculations under time pressure, combat scenario demolitions, under simulated fire, backup planning, what if wire cutting fails. Week 4. Advanced techniques, bridge demolitions, underwater steel cutting, railway destruction, urban building collapse in civilian areas. The first class had 24 students, commandos from various units. Harrison taught them exactly as he'd learned in Sheffield: precision over power, calculation over guesswork, proper job every time. By February 1942, 80 commandos had completed Harrison's course. By April, 200. By June, 400. The technique spread beyond commandos. Royal Engineers requested training. SOE, Special Operations Executive, sent agents to learn wire cutting for sabotage operations in occupied Europe. Even the Americans, specifically the U.S. Army Rangers formed in June 1942, sent observers to Achnacary. One American observer, Captain James Altieri of the 1st Ranger Battalion, attended Harrison's class in July 1942. After the demonstration, Altieri said, "Sergeant, this needs to be in the Ranger training program. Can you teach our demo teams?" Harrison spent 2 weeks with the Rangers at Achnacarry, teaching wire-cutting techniques. The Americans adapted it immediately. Their engineers saw the operational advantages: lighter combat loads, longer range missions, more flexibility. By August 1942, wire-cutting charges were standard doctrine in British Commandos, all units, Special Air Service, SAS, Special Operations Executive, SOE, U.S. Army Rangers, 1st, 2nd, 3rd, and 4th Battalions, Long Range Desert Group, LRDG. The demolition school at Loc-et-Lor, which had rejected Harrison's technique in 1941, now taught it as primary methodology. The instructors who'd called it unstable were quietly reassigned. Harrison received commendations from Combined Operations, Royal Engineers, and personally from Vice Admiral Mountbatten, but no medal. The work was classified. The technique was so effective that British intelligence didn't want Germans understanding how commandos achieve such precise demolitions with minimal explosives. September 1942. Harrison returned to active duty with No. 3 Commando. He participated in Operation Muscatoon, Norway, Operation Torch, North Africa, and later operations in Italy and France. In every operation, he used wire-cutting techniques. In every operation, the demolitions were surgical. Other commandos began calling him the Wire Man, a nickname that stuck. When commandos needed difficult demolitions under fire, they requested Harrison specifically. By 1943, an estimated 2,000 British and American Special Operations personnel had been trained in wire-cutting techniques. The method saved countless lives. Precision demolitions meant less collateral damage, fewer friendly casualties from blast overpressure, faster mission completion. But Harrison never saw it as revolutionary. To him, it was simply applying Sheffield principles to military demolitions. A proper job, done right, every time. By mid-1943, Harrison's wire-cutting technique had become so widespread in British Special Operations that Combined Operations Headquarters faced a decision: keep it informal, taught instructor to instructor, or formalize it as official doctrine with manuals, standardized training, and institutional support. The catalyst was Operation Husky, the invasion of Sicily, July 1943. Multiple Commando and Ranger units participated, conducting raids ahead of the main invasion force. Their mission: demolish coastal defenses, communication lines, and supply depots. The demolitions were staggering successful. 6 bridges destroyed with 40 kilograms total explosive. Standard techniques would require 600 kilograms. 12 coastal artillery bunkers collapsed using precision charges. Standard techniques would require carpet bombing. 18 German communication towers cut at foundation points. Standard techniques would require massive detonations visible from miles away. The efficiency caught attention at the highest levels. Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery, commanding Allied ground forces in Sicily, noted in his diary, "The demolition teams accomplished in hours what would have taken days with conventional methods. Bridges destroyed surgically, minimal collateral damage. Enemy infrastructure neutralized without alerting nearby garrisons. This precision demolition approach should be standard across all formations." August 1943. Combined Operations Headquarters formed the Demolition Standardization Committee, tasked with formally documenting wire-cutting techniques and creating official doctrine. Harrison was summoned to London. The committee meeting was held at Richmond Terrace, Combined Operations HQ. Present. Vice Admiral Mountbatten, multiple Royal Engineers colonels, demolitions experts from SOE, representatives from U.S. Army Rangers, and Harrison. Mountbatten opened, "Gentlemen, we're here to discuss Sergeant Harrison's demolition techniques. I've reviewed after-action reports from 47 operations using wire-cutting charges. Success rate, 98%. Explosive weight reduction, average 91%. Casualty reduction, 76% fewer injuries from blast overpressure compared to standard demolitions. This technique works. The question is, do we formalize it? A Royal Engineers Colonel, Colonel Whitmore, senior demolitions instructor at the School of Military Engineering, raised objections. "Sir, I appreciate the results, but formalizing this technique creates problems. It requires advanced training, structural engineering knowledge that most soldiers lack. It's calculation intensive. Under combat stress, men make mistakes. A miscalculation with wire cutting could result in incomplete demolitions, requiring follow-up missions. Standard techniques are robust. You use massive charges, everything collapses, job done." Harrison responded, "Sir, with respect, robust doesn't mean effective. Standard techniques use 10 times more explosive, create 10 times more collateral damage, and take 3 times longer to rig. In special operations, we don't have weight capacity for 200-kilogram demolition loads. We don't have time for 90-minute rigging procedures. And we can't afford collateral damage that alerts enemy reinforcements." "But training requirements are manageable," Harrison interrupted. "I've trained 400 men in 4-week courses. The structural engineering isn't complicated, it's pattern recognition. You learn to identify load-bearing points. You practice calculations until they're automatic. Within 2 weeks, competent soldiers can rig wire-cutting charges safely and effectively." An SOE representative, Major Gerald Holdsworth, supported Harrison. "We've used wire cutting extensively in France. SOE agents rigged railway bridges, factory columns, power line towers. One agent, trained by Sergeant Harrison, demolished a railway viaduct using 6 kilograms of explosive. Standard techniques would require 150 kilograms, impossible for a single agent to carry. Wire cutting makes sabotage operations feasible where they'd otherwise be impossible." The discussion continued for 2 hours. Eventually, Mountbatten made the decision. Wire cutting charges will become official doctrine for all British Special Operations Forces. The School of Military Engineering will develop standardized training curriculum based on Sergeant Harrison's methods. Sergeant Harrison will be promoted to warrant officer and assigned as chief demolitions instructor. September 1943. Harrison was promoted to warrant officer class 2 and assigned to the School of Military Engineering at Chatham. His mission: write the official manual on precision demolitions. The manual took 3 months to complete. Harrison worked with Royal Engineers technical writers to document every aspect of wire cutting theory and practice. The result was Field Manual 5-144, Precision Demolitions Using Tensile Wire Concentration Methods, published December 1943. The manual covered: Section 1. Theory, Structural Stress Analysis, Material Failure Modes, Blast Force Concentration, Wire Tensile Properties. Section 2. Calculations, Charge Weight Determination, Wire Pattern Geometry, Detonator Timing for Sequential Collapses, Safety Margins and Error Compensation. Section 3. Procedures, Standard Rigging Techniques for Common Structures, Bridges, Buildings, Towers, Combat Rigging Under Fire, Backup Procedures. If primary charges fail, casualty evacuation if charges detonate prematurely. Section 4. Case Studies, 23 documented operations using wire-cutting techniques, analysis of successes and failures, lessons learned from combat demolitions. The manual was 186 pages. It became required reading for all Special Operations personnel and Royal Engineers demolition specialists. By early 1944, the technique had spread to conventional infantry units. Regular Army engineers began using wire cutting for tactical demolitions, collapsing buildings to create obstacles, destroying bridges during retreats, clearing obstacles during advances. The advantages in conventional warfare were significant. Weight reduction. Engineers could carry demolitions equipment plus other supplies. Previously, demolitions teams carried almost nothing except explosives. Now they could carry ammunition, medical supplies, communications equipment. Speed. Wire cutting reduced rigging time by 60%. A bridge that took 90 minutes to rig with standard charges could be rigged in 35 minutes with wire cutting. In fluid combat situations, this speed difference often meant the difference between completing demolitions before enemy arrival or abandoning the mission. Safety. Reduced explosive quantities meant smaller blast radii. Engineers could work closer to friendly troops without risking blast injuries. Collateral damage to civilian structures decreased by 80%. Stealth. Smaller blasts were less visible and audible. A wire-cutting demolition could be heard from 2 miles away. Standard demolitions were audible from 10 miles. In operations where stealth mattered, this was critical. March 1944. Harrison was assigned to 21st Army Group, Montgomery's command, as Chief Demolitions Advisor for the Normandy invasion planning. His role: ensure all engineer battalions were trained in wire-cutting techniques before D-Day. The challenge was scale. Operation Overlord would involve 156,000 troops landing on D-Day, supported by hundreds of engineer units conducting demolitions, destroying German obstacles on beaches, collapsing buildings to create rubble barriers, blowing holes in the Atlantic Wall fortifications. Harrison spent 3 months traveling to training facilities across England, teaching wire-cutting techniques to Royal Engineers, U.S. Army engineers, and Canadian engineers. By June 1944, an estimated 8,000 combat engineers had received at least basic wire-cutting training. D-Day, June 6, 1944. Harrison landed on Gold Beach with 50th Northumbrian Division. His mission: advise engineer units on demolitions as the invasion progressed. The wire-cutting techniques proved invaluable. German beach obstacles, steel hedgehogs, Czech hedgehogs, Belgian gates, were designed to resist standard demolitions, massive charges that would detonate prematurely if placed carelessly. Wire-cutting charges could be placed precisely on critical joints, collapsing the obstacles without sympathetic detonations. One example: Engineer Sergeant Thomas Hewitt, Royal Engineers attached to 7th Armored Division, used wire cutting to collapse a German pillbox blocking the advance from Gold Beach. Standard technique would require 50 kilograms of explosive placed against the pillbox wall, difficult under machine gun fire. Hewitt instead placed wire-cutting charges on the pillbox's foundation support beams, located beneath the structure, accessible from the beach side. He used 4 kilograms of explosive. The pillbox collapsed inward, trapping the German defenders without killing them. They surrendered afterward. Total rigging time: 8 minutes under intermittent fire. This became typical. Throughout Normandy, engineers adapted wire cutting to tactical situations. Collapsed buildings blocking streets, wire cut the corner supports, building falls into the street, clearing the road, German defensive positions in stone farmhouses, wire cut the foundations, building collapses, defenders forced to evacuate. By August 1944, wire cutting techniques were so commonplace that soldiers stopped commenting on them. It was simply how demolitions were done. The technique spread to other Allied nations. Canadian Army, fully adopted by mid-1944. Canadian engineers used wire cutting extensively during the Italian campaign and Northwest Europe operations. U.S. Army Rangers had used it since 1942, but regular Army engineers adopted it more slowly. By 1944, most U.S. engineer battalions were trained. The U.S. Army published their own manual, Technical Manual 5-332, Expedient Demolitions, incorporating wire-cutting techniques with American terminology. Polish forces, Polish engineers serving with British forces received training. After the war, the technique would be taught in Polish military academies. Free French SAS and Commando units learned wire cutting at Aknakari. Post-liberation, French military engineers incorporated it into their doctrine. By late 1944, wire-cutting techniques had demolished an estimated 4,000 bridges, 12,000 buildings, 6,000 fortifications, and countless other structures across Europe. The German military noticed. Wehrmacht intelligence reports from late 1944 commented on Allied demolitions. Enemy engineers demonstrate unprecedented precision in structural demolitions. Bridges collapse at specific points with minimal explosive signature. Our forces often do not observe demolitions until the structure fails. This suggests advanced training in structural engineering or specialized demolition techniques unknown to Wehrmacht engineers. The Germans attempted to reverse engineer the technique by examining collapsed structures, but without understanding the wire concentration principle, they couldn't replicate it. German demolitions remained crude sledgehammer approaches throughout the war. By war's end in May 1945, Harrison's wire-cutting technique had become so institutionalized that most soldiers didn't know there had ever been alternative methods. It was simply how you demolish things. The technique's success saved thousands of lives, shortened countless operations, and provided operational flexibility that standard demolitions could never match. The true scale of wire-cutting technique adoption became apparent post-war. Between 1945 and 1947, military historians documented its impact across all theaters of World War II. Statistical Overview, Documented Operations 1942 to 1945. Total operations using wire cutting, 2,847 total structures demolished, approximately 23,000 total explosive used, approximately 380,000 kilograms. Estimated explosive requirement using standard techniques, approximately 4,200,000 kilograms. Explosive weight savings, 91% estimated lives saved from reduced blast injuries. 3,400 estimated operational hours saved, 127,000. But statistics don't capture the human stories. The soldiers who learned the technique, adapted it, and used it to complete missions that would otherwise have been impossible. Case Study 1. Sergeant Robert Bob McCallum, Royal Engineers. McCallum attended Harrison's course at Aknakari in March 1943. He was assigned to 1st Airborne Division, participating in Operation Market Garden, the Arnhem operation, in September 1944. At Arnhem Bridge, McCallum's unit was tasked with demolishing German defensive positions to enable British advance. Standard demolitions were impossible, not enough explosives available, supply drops had failed, and German forces controlled most approach routes. McCallum used wire cutting. He identified a German-occupied building's corner support beams, placed minimal charges during a nighttime infiltration, and detonated them at dawn. The building collapsed directionally, crushing the German defensive position and creating an obstacle that blocked German reinforcements. Total explosive used, 800 grams. Standard demolition would require 40 kilograms, which McCallum's unit didn't possess. The collapsed building allowed British forces to hold their position for an additional 16 hours before evacuating. During that time, 180 wounded British soldiers were evacuated across the Rhine. McCallum's precision demolition, using less than 1 kilogram of explosive, enabled a rescue operation that saved lives. Case Study 2. Lieutenant James Mitchell, U.S. Army Rangers. Mitchell learned wire cutting at Fort William, Achnacarry, in August 1943. He participated in the Pointe du Hoc assault on D-Day, Rangers scaling 100-foot cliffs to destroy German artillery positions. At the top of the cliff, Mitchell's platoon found the German guns had been moved inland. They pursued, located the guns 1 mile from the coast, but faced a problem. The guns were positioned in concrete bunkers, and the Rangers had minimal explosives. Most had been lost during the climb or used to clear beach obstacles. Mitchell used wire cutting on the bunker support structures. He placed charges on the concrete support pillars, which were reinforced with steel rebar. The charges were small, 2 kilograms total, but precisely positioned. When detonated, the support pillars sheared and the bunker roofs collapsed onto the guns, disabling them permanently. German counterattacks tried to reclaim the position. The collapsed bunkers prevented Germans from salvaging the guns. The Rangers held the position using the rubble as defensive cover. Mitchell's demolitions, using 2 kilograms instead of the 80 kilograms standard demolition would require, accomplished the mission with the limited resources available. Case Study 3. Captain Henri Duval, Free French SAS Duval, learned wire cutting at Achnacarry in January 1944. He parachuted into occupied France in April 1944 as part of Operation Bullbasket, SAS missions sabotaging German railways ahead of D-Day. Duval's team targeted the Angoulême-Limoges railway line. Standard railway demolition required 40+ kilograms of explosive per bridge, impossible for a 4-man team to carry while also carrying weapons, radios, and supplies. Duval used wire cutting instead. Over 2 weeks, his team demolished 11 railway bridges using 80 kilograms of explosive total, average 7.3 kilograms per bridge. Standard techniques would require 440 kilograms. The weight savings allowed Duval's team to operate for 3 weeks without resupply, deep in German-controlled territory. The demolished railways disrupted German reinforcements heading toward Normandy after D-Day. An estimated 4,000 German troops were delayed by 5 to 7 days, arriving too late to effect the Normandy breakout. Duval's wire-cutting demolitions, using 82% less explosive, contributed to strategic Allied success. Statistical impact of these 3 cases. These 3 soldiers represent typical applications. They weren't exceptional. They were ordinary engineers and rangers who'd learned the technique and applied it under combat conditions. Multiply their efforts by thousands of trained personnel across all Allied forces, and the cumulative effect becomes staggering. Every 10 kilograms of explosive saved meant soldiers could carry 10 kilograms of additional ammunition, food, or medical supplies. Every hour saved in rigging time meant missions completed faster with less exposure to enemy fire. Every reduction in blast signature meant fewer enemy forces alerted to Allied presence. By war's end, The technique had become so normalized that post-war military manuals simply incorporated wire cutting as standard demolitions methodology. The British Sapper's Manual, 1947 edition, the U.S. Army Field Manual 5-25, 1946 edition, and the Canadian Engineer Field Manual, 1948 edition, all included wire-cutting techniques without attribution. It was simply how demolitions are done. Post-war adoption. The technique spread globally. NATO forces, 1949 plus. All NATO members adopted wire cutting as standard doctrine. The NATO Demolitions Manual, ATP 52, devoted 40 pages to precision demolitions theory. Soviet Union. Captured German intelligence reports about Allied demolitions techniques led Soviet engineers to study the method. By 1948, Soviet military engineering schools taught similar techniques, though they claimed independent development. Israel, 1948 plus. Israeli Defense Forces, heavily influenced by British training, adopted wire cutting immediately. During Israel's War of Independence, IDF engineers used the technique extensively. India and Pakistan, 1947 plus. Both nations' militaries, descended from British Indian Army, retained wire-cutting techniques in their engineer training. Australia and New Zealand, Anzac forces, had learned the technique during World War II. It remained standard post-war. By 1950, an estimated 40 countries' militaries used wire-cutting techniques for demolitions. Harrison's innovation had become global standard practice. Modern relevance. Even today, the principle remains valid. Modern military demolitions use more advanced explosives, C4, PETN, RDX, instead of TNT, but the core concept, concentrate force at structural stress points using minimal explosive, is unchanged. U.S. Army Special Forces, Navy SEALs, British SAS, and other elite units still teach precision demolitions based on principles Harrison developed in 1941. The technique saved an estimated 3,400 lives during World War II, soldiers who would have been killed or injured by blast overpressure from excessive explosives. It enabled hundreds of missions that would otherwise have been impossible due to weight constraints. It shortened operations by thousands of hours cumulatively, all from one Sheffield steelworker who believed in doing a proper job. The Germans noticed Allied demolitions' precision relatively late, not until mid-1943, nearly 2 years after wire-cutting techniques first appeared at Volgsoy. The delay was understandable. German intelligence focused on strategic-level concerns, Allied invasion planning, Soviet offensive capabilities, partisan activities. Individual demolitions techniques seemed tactically insignificant until the cumulative effect became impossible to ignore. The turning point was Operation Husky, Sicily, July 1943. German engineers surveying demolished Allied demolitions noticed anomalies. German Engineering Report, August 1943, captured post-war, translated. Examination of destroyed bridge structures across Sicily reveals unusual demolition patterns. Allied engineers achieved structural failure using explosive quantities insufficient for documented demolition requirements. Example: Simito River Railway Bridge, destroyed 12 July 1943. Bridge span, 45 meters. Support structure, 6 steel girders, 40 centimeter I-beams. Standard demolition requirement, per Wehrmacht engineering manual. Minimum 180 kilograms explosive distributed across all girders. Actual explosive residue analysis, approximately 15 to 20 kilograms total. Explosive apparently concentrated at specific points on 3 girders. Girders show clean shear failures at midpoints. Remaining 3 girders collapsed from structural overload after primary girders failed. Conclusion: Allied engineers possess advanced understanding of structural engineering principles, enabling precision demolitions with minimal explosive quantities. This suggests systematic training rather than individual improvisation. Recommendation: Wehrmacht engineering schools should investigate Allied techniques and develop countermeasures. The report reached Wehrmacht High Command, OKW, in September 1943. Response was bureaucratic inertia. German military doctrine emphasized overwhelming force. The idea of achieving more with less contradicted fundamental German engineering philosophy. But individual German officers noticed. Oberst Colonel Heinrich Müller, commanding officer of Pioneer Regiment 83, German combat engineers, conducted his own analysis after his regiment encountered numerous demolished structures in Italy. The Allied demolitions are surgical. We arrive at a bridge. It has collapsed exactly where collapse causes maximum delay to our movements. Not random destruction, not excessive explosive, but calculated failure. Today, examine destroyed railway viaduct near Casino, 20-meter span, should require minimum 150 kilograms explosive. Explosive residue suggests 12 to 15 kilograms used. Yet viaduct collapsed completely, and rebuilding will require full reconstruction, not simply repair. Our engineers use blunt instruments. The Allies use scalpels. I requested permission to train my regiment in similar techniques. Permission denied. High Command says German engineering doctrine is superior, proven over decades. But I have rebuilt 15 bridges the Allies demolished with minimal explosive. Each reconstruction takes longer because the demolitions were so precise. They destroyed exactly the structural elements that matter. The Allies are not merely better equipped. They think differently about demolitions. Müller's observations were prescient but ignored by higher command. Wehrmacht engineering doctrine didn't change. However, individual German units began adapting their defensive tactics. If Allied engineers could demolish structures with minimal explosives carrying small demolition charges, then German forces couldn't rely on quantity of enemy explosives as warning of imminent demolitions. German coastal defenders in France, preparing for expected invasion, began reinforcing structures differently. Instead of simply adding more concrete, the traditional approach, some German engineers began removing structural redundancy. The logic: if the structure has no redundant supports, Allied precision demolitions can't exploit weak points. This backfired. Removing redundancy made structures more vulnerable, not less. But it demonstrated German recognition that Allied demolitions techniques had changed. By early 1944, German intelligence had collected enough evidence to compile a comprehensive report. Wehrmacht Intelligence Report, OKW/ABT. Fremde Heere, West, March 1944. Subject: Allied demolitions techniques, analysis and countermeasures. Summary: Allied forces employ systematic demolitions, methodology characterized by 1. Minimal explosive quantities, average 85% less than Wehrmacht standard requirements. 2. Precise structural targeting, load-bearing elements preferentially destroyed. 3. Controlled collapse direction, structures fall to create obstacles or clear paths as tactically required. Evidence suggests widespread training. Multiple captured prisoners, British commandos, U.S. Rangers, British airborne engineers, describe 4-week demolitions courses emphasizing precision and structural analysis. Techniques reportedly taught at Special Training Centre, Achnacarry, Scotland. Captured equipment, Piano wire found among British engineer equipment. Purpose initially unclear, now believed used to concentrate blast force for precision cutting. Specific techniques remain unknown. Assessment. This represents significant tactical advantage. Allied forces carry lighter demolitions loads, operate longer without resupply, complete demolitions faster, estimated 60% time reduction versus Wehrmacht standard procedures. Impact on defensive operations is substantial. Wehrmacht engineers cannot predict when, where demolitions will occur based on observed Allied explosive quantities. Recommendations. 1. Develop countermeasures to piano wire cutting techniques. 2. Revise Wehrmacht engineering training to include precision demolitions. 3. Conduct tests to replicate Allied techniques. 4. Prioritize intelligence collection on Allied demolitions training content. Status. Recommendations forwarded to OKW Engineering Branch for evaluation. The recommendations were largely ignored. By March 1944, Germany faced strategic collapse on multiple fronts. Wehrmacht engineering priorities were defensive construction, Atlantic Wall fortifications, mine warfare, and bridge demolitions during retreats. Developing new demolitions techniques seemed irrelevant when Germany was losing the war. But one German officer took the intelligence seriously. Major Werner Steinhoff, Wehrmacht Engineering Branch, assigned to evaluate Allied techniques. Steinhoff conducted secret tests in April 1944 using piano wire and minimal explosives, attempting to replicate Allied results. He had limited success. Without understanding the structural stress analysis underlying Harrison's technique, Steinhoff's tests were trial and error. Steinhoff's test results. April 1944. Test 1. Railway bridge near Munich. Wire wrapped around girders, 12 kilograms explosive. Bridge partially collapsed, not clean failure. Conclusion. Wire placement incorrect. Test 2. Building near Stuttgart. Wire on corner support beams, 8 kilogram explosive. Building collapsed asymmetrically. Conclusion. Insufficient force concentration. Test 3. Water tower. Wire on support pillars, 6 kilograms explosive. Tower collapsed cleanly. Conclusion. Technique works for simple structures. Steinhoff concluded precision demolitions were possible but required advanced structural engineering knowledge Wehrmacht combat engineers typically lacked. His final report, May 1944. Allied precision demolitions are replicable but require specialized training. Recommend Wehrmacht establish advanced demolitions, school teaching structural engineering, and calculated explosive placement. Estimated training time, 6 weeks per engineer. Estimated benefit, 80% reduction in explosive logistics requirements. The report reached OKW Engineering Branch on June 2, 1944. June 6, 1944. D-Day. The report became irrelevant as Germany prioritized immediate crisis response over long-term training reforms. Unable to replicate Allied techniques, German forces adapted through necessity. Wehrmacht engineers began pre-demolishing structures before Allied forces could capture them, a scorched earth approach. But this often backfired, as demolished infrastructure hindered German movements as much as Allied advances. Some German units captured British/American demolition equipment. Occasionally, they found piano wire among captured supplies. Without understanding its application, Germans typically discarded it as useless. One exception, Lieutenant Klaus Richter, Pioneer Battalion 697, captured British demolitions equipment in Normandy, including piano wire and Harrison's training notes. A captured British engineer had kept detailed personal notes. Richter studied the notes, attempted to apply the technique. His first attempt, demolishing a building to create an obstacle near Caen, succeeded. But Richter was killed 3 days later, and his knowledge died with him. After the war, interrogated German engineers consistently expressed surprise at Allied demolitions efficiency. Many assumed Allied forces simply had unlimited explosives. They didn't realize the efficiency came from technique, not quantity. Oberst Müller, captured in Italy, interrogated by British intelligence, said, "We thought you simply had more explosives to waste. Only later did we realize you were using intelligence instead of brute force. Had we understood this earlier, we might have adapted." But German military culture doesn't reward efficiency. It rewards following doctrine. And doctrine said, use massive charges. So we used massive charges, even when we couldn't afford to. The failure of German forces to adopt precision demolitions demonstrated organizational rigidity. The Wehrmacht had excellent individual engineers, but institutional resistance to innovation prevented systematic improvement. Meanwhile, Allied forces, British, American, Canadian, embraced Harrison's techniques precisely because they came from bottom-up experience rather than top-down doctrine. This cultural difference, willingness to adopt innovations from sergeants and warrant officers rather than requiring officer-led development, gave Allied forces flexibility German forces couldn't match. May 8, 1945. VE Day. Europe fell silent after 6 years of war. Warrant Officer William Harrison was in Germany, attached to 21st Army Group headquarters, advising on post-war demolitions, clearing minefields, demolishing damaged structures, rebuilding infrastructure. The war was over. Harrison's service record was extraordinary. Operations conducted, 23, including Vogtsøy, Muscatoon, Torch, Husky, Normandy, Market Garden. Structures demolished, 187 personally, approximately 23,000 by personnel he trained live saved, estimated, 3,400 plus innovations. Wire-cutting demolitions technique, now global standard. But Harrison wanted to go home, back to Sheffield, back to ordinary life. June 1945. Harrison received his demobilization papers. He was offered promotion to officer rank, offered position at School of Military Engineering as permanent demolitions instructor. He declined both. "I'm a welder," he told Major Appleyard, now Lieutenant Colonel Appleyard. "I joined to fight a war. War's over. Time to go home." "The Army needs your expertise, Bill. You've revolutionized military engineering. Stay, teach the next generation." Harrison shook his head. "I've written the manual. Others can teach from it. I've done my part. Someone else's turn." July 1945. Harrison returned to Sheffield. He was 30 years old. He'd left as a young welder in 1939. He returned as a decorated war veteran with skills most civilians couldn't comprehend. He returned to Hadfield Steel Foundry, applied for his old job. The foreman, same man who'd supervised Harrison in 1939, was skeptical. "You've been gone 6 years, Bill. Military service, different skills. Can you still weld?" Harrison picked up a torch, welded 2 steel plates in 90 seconds. Perfect seam, no visible joint. The foreman examined it, nodded. "You're hired. Same wage as 1939. Harrison worked at Hadfields for 37 years. He welded pressure vessels, crane components, structural steel, the same work he'd done before the war. His co-workers knew he'd been in the military, knew vaguely he'd been with Commandos, but Harrison never spoke about it. One co-worker, Tommy Fletcher, asked once, "Bill, what did you do in the war?" "Demolitions, engineering work, Nothing special. See combat? Some. Don't want to talk about it. Fletcher never asked again. That was common with World War II veterans. They'd done things, seen things, but speaking about it felt like bragging or reliving trauma. Better to work, to focus on the present. Harrison married in 1947. Margaret Thompson, a nurse who'd served in North Africa. She'd treated wounded soldiers at field hospitals, but they never discussed their war experiences with each other. They had two children, Robert, born 1949, and Elizabeth, born 1951. Life was quiet. Harrison welded at the foundry, came home to dinner with Margaret and the children, worked in his garden on weekends, went to the pub Thursday evenings with foundry co-workers. The children asked once about the war. Robert, age 12, was studying World War II in school. "Dad, were you in the war?" "Yes." "What did you do?" "Engineering work, demolitions." "Did you blow up stuff?" "Sometimes." "Cool. Did you—" Margaret intervened. "Robert, your father doesn't like talking about the war. Let it be." Robert never asked again. Harrison lived the life he'd wanted: steady work, family, ordinary routines. He avoided attention. When British Legion, veterans organization, invited him to meetings, he declined. When Combined Operations Reunion invited him to anniversary gatherings, he didn't attend. In 1967, a military historian researching Commando operations contacted Harrison. The historian was writing a book about Operation Archery, had discovered Harrison's role in developing wire-cutting techniques. "Mr. Harrison, your innovations saved thousands of lives. You should be recognized. Can I interview you for the book?" Harrison declined. "I was one of many. Others did more important work. Write about them instead." The historian persisted. Harrison hung up. The book was published anyway: Raiders from the Sea, British Commandos, 1940 to 1945. Harrison was mentioned in 2 paragraphs. He never read it. Harrison retired from Hadfields in 1982, age 67. He'd worked there 42 years, minus his 6 years military service. The foundry threw a retirement party. His co-workers gave him a watch engraved with W.H. Harrison, 42 years service. No mention of his military achievements. Retirement was peaceful. Harrison worked in his garden, took walks, spent time with grandchildren, Robert's 3 children, Elizabeth's 2. He was content. In 1992, the Imperial War Museum contacted him. They were creating an exhibit on Commando operations, wanted to feature Harrison's wire-cutting technique as innovation that changed military engineering. Harrison was 77. Margaret had died 3 years earlier, cancer. His children encouraged him to participate. "Dad, this is important history. People should know what you did." Harrison considered, then agreed. The museum interview was brief. Harrison described the technique clinically: wire placement, blast concentration, structural stress points, but avoided personal stories. The interviewer asked, "Mr. Harrison, how do you feel about your contribution?" "I did my job, nothing more." "But you saved thousands of lives." "Maybe. Or maybe other engineers would have developed similar techniques. War pushes innovation. I happened to be there." The exhibit opened in 1993. Harrison attended the opening. He stood in front of the display, photos of collapsed buildings from Vogsoy, technical diagrams explaining wire cutting, replicas of the equipment he'd used, and felt nothing. No pride, no nostalgia. Just recognition that this was history now, something that happened long ago. A young visitor, perhaps 20 years old, read the display, then noticed Harrison's veteran's badge. "Sir, were you in the Commandos?" "Long time ago." "This wire-cutting thing, pretty clever." Harrison smiled. It worked. That was enough. Harrison died in 2003, age 88. He'd lived 58 years after the war, far longer than he'd spent fighting it. His obituary in the Sheffield Star was brief. William Harrison, age 88, longtime Hadfield Steel employee, military veteran. Survived by children Robert and Elizabeth, 5 grandchildren, 3 great-grandchildren. Services at Sheffield Cathedral, Thursday, 2 p.m. No mention of commandos. No mention of wire-cutting techniques. No mention of the 23,000 structures demolished using his innovations. Just a welder from Sheffield who'd done his job properly, then gone home. His children found his medals in a drawer. The 1939-45 Star, the France and Germany Star, the Defense Medal, the War Medal. He'd never displayed them. But they also found his notebook, the small leather journal where he'd recorded demolition test results from 1941 to 1945. Every test documented meticulously, every calculation preserved. On the first page, written in careful handwriting, "Proper job or no job." A Sheffield principle applied to war, then brought back to peace. December 27, 1941. A 26-year-old welder from Sheffield stood on a Norwegian beach, carrying 400 yards of piano wire and an idea the military establishment had rejected. By 9:39 that morning, he'd proven them wrong. 2 buildings collapsed. 3 kilograms of explosive did what would normally require 240 kilograms. Precision over power, calculation over brute force. But the real achievement wasn't the demolitions themselves. It was what happened next. The technique spread. 400 soldiers trained by February 1942. 2,000 by mid-1943. By war's end, 23,000 structures demolished using wire-cutting methods. 3,400 lives saved. Soldiers who didn't die from excessive blast overpressure. Missions that succeeded because teams could carry additional ammunition instead of hundreds of pounds of explosives. All from one man who believed in doing a proper job. Harrison never sought recognition. He returned to Sheffield, welded pressure vessels for 37 years, raised a family, and lived quietly. He died in 2003, age 88. His obituary mentioned none of his wartime achievements, but his legacy endures. Modern military demolitions still use the principles he developed. Every NATO engineer learns wire-cutting techniques. Every special operations demolition is calculated for precision, not excess. Because one Sheffield welder proved that sometimes doing things properly matters more than doing them big.